All right, let's get started. Today, we're conducting a military after-action review of the Basque offensive against Vitoria. This was a really critical operation in the northern theater of the Spanish Civil War. We're going to break down the plan, the execution, and ultimately, the reasons it all went wrong.
So, to understand this operation, you first have to grasp the strategic picture back in late 1936. The Republican High Command came up with this really ambitious idea. As you can see on this map, the goal was to launch a huge offensive from the north, time it with another one from Catalonia, and have them link up with the Central Front. The whole point was to take the immense pressure off of Madrid.
Now, before we go any further, I just want to be crystal clear. This entire briefing is based on the incredibly detailed research of Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo and his Batallas Guerra Civil project. We're going to stick strictly to the operational documents and the analysis from that source.
Okay, let's dive into the first part of our review, the Republican operational plan. What was supposed to happen here?
This slide really shows you just how ambitious the initial thinking was. The plan, which was drafted on November 9th by Captain Ciotat, who was head of operations for the Northern Army, called for not one, but 3 simultaneous offensives right across the entire front, in Asturias, Santander, and Vizcaya. The idea was to hit them everywhere at once, seize the initiative, and just completely overwhelm the Nationalist defenses.
So, let's zoom in on the Basque sector, because this is where the main effort was. The Army Corps of Euskadi got the big assignment. Their mission was a direct offensive on the southern front. As you can see, the axis of advance was clear. First, take Vitoria, and then push on to Miranda de Ebro, which was a huge communications hub.
And here's the broader concept on the map. You can see it was basically a big pincer movement. While the Basque Corps was pushing from the east, the Santander Army Corps was supposed to attack from the west. The plan was for both of these forces to crash down and converge on that final objective, Miranda de Ebro.
The mission for the Basque Corps was laid out in very clear phases. Phase 1, they had to secure a line running from Arlabon through Villarreal all the way to Murguia. Phase 2 was to capture Vitoria itself. Phase 3, Nanclares. And the final objective was Miranda. It was all designed to be this very methodical, step-by-step advance.
All right, here's the order of battle for the Basque Army Corps. You can see they organized the force into 3 columns and a reserve. But look closely at the numbers. The main punch, the main effort, was clearly given to the 2nd column under Lieutenant Colonel Cueto. He had 13 battalions. That's almost half of the entire assault force right there.
Now, the operations order itself is, well, it's pretty revealing. This map shows just how incredibly detailed and rigid the plan was, just for day 1. Every single battalion's movement, every artillery target, was scripted out in advance. That kind of tells you the command didn't have a lot of confidence in the initiative of their junior leaders and their pretty green troops.
Okay, so that was the plan. Now let's move on to the execution and see how this plan actually held up against reality. What happened on the ground?
Well, a critical decision was made right at the 11th hour. Captain Ciotat changed the plan. He completely canceled the flanking attack on Murguia that the 3rd column was supposed to carry out. Now, this decision, which was apparently made against the advice of Basque President Aguirre, really narrowed the whole offensive front, and it focused everything on the advance toward Villarreal.
And that brings us to the tactical focus of this whole thing, Villarreal. The town, as you can see on the left, was a key communications node. It really was the key to Vitoria. The map on the right shows the Nationalist deployment. And here's the absolutely crucial point, the insane numerical difference. The entire town was being defended by a garrison of just 638 men.
So by December 2nd, after 2 days of really intense fighting, the Basque forces were on the verge of success. I mean, look at the situation map. Villarreal was almost completely surrounded by fire. Victory was right there. But, and this is a huge but, a critical logistical problem popped up. Because of terrible fire discipline, their ammunition supplies were getting dangerously low.
And this map, this shows the turning point of the entire battle. The Nationalist command reacted fast and they reacted effectively. Colonel Alonso Vega, leading a relief column, launched a decisive counterattack. His guys slammed into the encircling units, broke right through them, and cleared that vital road to Vitoria. The siege was broken, and just like that, the whole tactical situation was flipped on its head.
So what about that other pincer coming from the west? Well, it failed. The offensive by the Santander Army Corps got bogged down by its own overly complex plan. Its forces made basically no significant progress. They failed to draw away any Nationalist reserves, and they didn't achieve a single one of their primary objectives.
So by the end of December, the offensive was officially dead.
The attack had failed across the board, and as this map shows, the front line just stabilized. It would pretty much stay that way for the rest of the winter. The window of opportunity had closed.
And that brings us to the final section of this briefing, analyzing the failure. Why was there such a huge gap between what was planned and what actually happened?
Well, if you look at it from the political leadership's perspective, the blame was pretty clear. The Basque president, Aguirre, in a letter to the Minister of Defense, pointed his fingers squarely at, quote, the whims of Captain Ciutat and his last-minute change to the plan. He saw that as a primary cause of the whole disaster.
However, the military's own internal assessment was, well, it was different. Martinez Cabrera, the inspector of the Northern Army, gave a very blunt professional opinion. He said the failure wasn't because of a lack of weapons or supplies, but, quote, simply to the lack of good commanders and organization.
So, if we put all of this together, our doctrinal analysis points to several key factors. First, the plan itself was just flawed. It was too complex and way too rigid for new troops. That problem was made worse by poor training and a real lack of NCOs and junior officers. Bad fire discipline led directly to that ammo crisis we talked about. The failure of the supporting attack from Santander was also critical. And you have to give credit where it's due. The enemy performed well. Colonel Alonso Vega's rapid, decisive reaction and the incredible resistance of that small garrison in Villarreal were huge factors.
And the cost of this failure, it was just immense. The Basque Army Corps took about 4,500 casualties. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a catastrophic political blow. It shattered morale, and it crippled the Republic's ability to launch any new offensives in the north for months.
So this leaves us with one final critical question to think about. When you combine an overly rigid plan, a serious lack of trained leaders, and green troops going up against a really determined defense, you have to ask, was this offensive doomed to fail before the first shot was even fired? And that concludes this briefing.